My question relates to the whole purpose of this course,
Rob, put it a little closer to you.
entitled International Economy, Security, and Culture. And I was wondering what our international government was, if there's international government, if there should be international government, and if there needs to be international government to correct the market failures of that are out there that you were talking about.
Certainly, there have been attempts at the notion of international government. You will probably not like to know that generally the motivation behind international governments so far has been to make the markets more efficient generally for the mercantilists or the capitalists. There have been, when Europe was in the 16, 17, 1800s, you know, the kings and queens and princes would get together and talk about trade and trade routes, and there was the beginning of law that would be seen as international law for the high seas. And then the biggest move came with Woodrow Wilson and the First World War and the issue of how do we in fact acknowledge first that we are one world, and that it would be to our benefit to have something called the United Nations, in which we would deal with global issues. When Wilson's notion of the United Nations, League of Nations, right, came back to the United States, he got his head handed to himself. I mean, the legislature, there was a great desire to, in fact, just like today, be very protectionist and not to deal with other people's needs, but to optimize our own. And so as a result, you don't see a robust now United Nations transformed from the League of Nations. There are other efforts being made, the G7, the G20, where people talk. And in addition to that, there was a great book buried by Barnett, written in the late 60s, early 70s, called Global Reach. And at that time, Barnett put forward the thesis, which in fact is pretty much coming to bear, and once again Barry's data would demonstrate that in fact the silent but pervasive, powerful, and profound global economic force would become the corporation, the international corporation. And in my life inside of a Fortune 100 company, it is clearly the case that the global corporation, probably more than any other structured entity in our society, pays more attention. I worked in 26 countries, probably had better information than, I say this with it's what little we know about corporations unless you've lived inside of them. I had 3 information sources that came to me every day about every country, about anything I wanted to know. And the information was equal to or better than the daily briefing that the President of the United States got. And in fact, I could make it even more specific. I had airplanes, helicopters, people that could extract people. I had contracts with all sorts of high-level people. I had to know everything there was to know about these folks. But it was in the context of a corporation that did not report to the public except insofar as it reported to its shareholders. Now, in terms of where we're going with this development, once again, just like the Stiglitz battle going on, the battle's going on right now over the future of the United Nations and how much money developing countries will pay to the United Nations for the good that they get in return from it versus how much money the United States is paying to the United Nations versus what they are able to say about how the United Nations treats the lesser developed countries. Once again, it's back to this issue of values and what the economist, Barry said to me the last time I did this talk, he said, you know, Bob, you talked this whole time and didn't talk about anything that I did in economics over the last 35 years. And this, however, is the basic economics, and it's this issue of preference revelation, which was supposed to be done through markets. But the issue now before us is revealing our preferences. And what will be the vehicle through which we, all the societies in the world, will reveal their preferences and hopefully learn how to resolve them without going to war. But that's another possibility.
Great. Question?
Hi, I was thinking about some of the slides that you were showing, Mary, with the numbers on exports, and the U.S. I think was at the top of exports, and I think these days that we import everything, we aren't such a big exporter. So what I want to know is what are we exporting, and what percentage of our exports are weapons and defense?
Yes. You know, the weapons and defense. I mean, look, we export a lot of food, okay? We export a lot of intellectual property, for which we do, those are dollar numbers. So I can export a bit of intellectual property and make a lot of money in a continuing stream from it. Further down become drugs and pharmaceuticals, but a lot of it's the heavy-duty stuff up above in terms of airplanes, ships, and then munitions.
A lot of it is also, go back here to get those data. A lot of it is also services. It's insurance. It's used to be banking services. Let's see, it's a little bit higher than that, I think, where we had the exports. Here it was. So we weren't the largest. It was the Euro area was the largest. Think of Mercedes. Think about Bosch. Think about Miele and other producers of manufactured goods. We used to be the world's largest manufacturer largest producer of manufactured goods. Back in the 1950s, the General Motors Corporation was by far the largest exporter in the world. In 1954, it actually exported over 2 million automobiles to the rest of the world, mostly Chevys and things like that. You can still see them on the road in Cuba when you go to Havana. So we used to do that a lot. Now we are a major exporter of services, as I said. But we're also a major we're the largest exporter of military weaponry in the world. Other countries are trying to catch up, but in fact it's a major industry, and it's an industry, by the way, that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and New England is deeply involved in, through Raytheon, through General Electric, and through Pratt & Whitney. In fact, almost every state is an exporter of military weapons of some kind or parts for weapons. And therefore, it turns out to be a major part of the economy, and it's not surprising that we have a military hardware-dominated defense policy because of that. Another question? Over here? Back here. Could you hand that back, Sam? Thanks. You got to speak right into the mic.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah, that works.
Some experts have pointed to the WTO as an important global institution that's supposed to lay the rules and monitor international trade and help things to work smoothly. But the rules making and the discussion, the way the WTO works, puts developing countries at a disadvantage in terms of global trade. And this results to poor trading practices and it contributes to underdevelopment. What's your take or perspective on that?
I think it's true. The issue is that it depends on where you are sitting, if you will. The most common issues that occur from the World Trade Organization, the IMF, have to do first with disciplines that are required in terms of debt payments. Let's say you want to be an exporter, and you are X, Y, and Z country, and you have much you want to export, and you have some minerals that you want to export. And to do that, you need what? You need an airport or a deep water port. And then in addition to that, you need ships and you need airplanes. Now those require heavy-duty capital outlays. And so what happens is that application is made to the World Trade Organization, or IMF, for cheap money, low-cost money, and let's say you need $5 billion to do this. What happens is then the persons from the World Trade Organization or the IMF come and visit the country. And they say, well, here is what is required for you to get this money. You have to have the appropriate accounting, reporting, and control systems in place. This is probably being said to a country that at best has cell phones and at best has maybe laptop computers, but probably doesn't have the type of accounting, the national accounting, reporting, and control system in place to handle the accounting necessary for managing $3 billion worth of debt payments. So that becomes issue number one. And there's immediate issues of default and people getting all pissed off at each other, okay? Because the country that got the money says, to your point, you know, this isn't right. You can't cause us to do this. That's number one. Number two, you have to be able to produce financial statements for the country, if not the debt issuance, and they have to be in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles promulgated by the United States. And nobody in this country even knows what that means. Okay? So that becomes what is perceived as an unfairness. Third, you have to act in accordance with the Foreign Corrupt Practices laws of the United States. And culturally, this country, in fact, may use bribery as a means of currency. They might call it barter as opposed to bribery. And they are dinged because of that. So those are three major reasons why there are problems that develop as relates to lending going from the wealthy to the poorer countries. It generally has to do with the sophistication of the systems, the reporting, and then the social mores.
Good.
This might seem slightly off subject, but would you explain what the Mass Development Corp does
What the agency that I run does.
and why?
The student that asked about this course, this has nothing to do with international, but I'll be glad to answer. The Massachusetts Development Finance Agency is the state's banker and land developer. And we are responsible for developing generally what are called excess properties, abused properties, orphan properties around the Commonwealth that fall to the state. That there is not a market mechanism no one wants to deal with. For example, we are responsible for rehabilitating the salt install building on Cambridge, for those of you who know downtown Boston. And I borrowed $200 million to do that, and then had to find tenants to tenant the building up to pay the debt service off of that. But in addition to that, the pier in Gloucester, when it was falling apart and when the fishermen were having problems, I financed that to make sure that the fishing industry continues. New Bedford, I'm working now on taking the mills down along the Acushnet River to rebuild a new economy for the folks of New Bedford. Lawrence, we do the master planning for Lawrence to try to get things up and going with the old mills in Lawrence. Springfield, we are really the economic development person there and deal with a lot of brownfield development, that is taking the old mill sites around the Commonwealth, in this case especially in Springfield around the Smith & Wesson site and some other areas, and cleaning them up and then attracting industry to them, which we're doing at this point in time. Also in Springfield, I just bought the federal courthouse, which has been moved out of, so that there's a new courthouse in town, and we're rehabbing the federal courthouse, and we'll turn that into a very good commercial piece of real estate on Main Street, to make sure that it doesn't go dark and that there are not more problems. Pittsfield, dealing with the abandoned GE site, 60, 70 acres that GE just moved out on. Have to clean it up and then market that. So that's a lot of what we do.
Thank you. Other question? Get over here.
Hi there. I guess my question is, if the, I don't know, WTO, whatever the organizations are the larger countries are the ones that set the standard, the wealthier countries. What is sort of the next step? I mean, how can it be rectified? It seems like you've thought a lot about this, you're very knowledgeable, you have experience. What might be a solution that is reasonable to achieve over the next 10 years?
Well, I think, you know, partially to this gentleman's question, and what I was trying to raise and what I was saying is that, you know, you say potato, I say potato. The issue of preference revelation becomes really very important. In my days in Cabot owned the LNG facility in Boston Harbor. I sold it, but we owned it for years. And we would buy LNG and ship it into Boston Harbor from Nigeria, from all sorts of the African coastal countries, along with Brazil and the like. And I can assure you that, and let's take Nigeria for example, that the Nigerian leadership had some of the best lawyers representing them and made some of the best contracts imaginable, and did very well in terms of international economic development. Price points were reasonable on an economic scale, but the result of the dollars going into Nigeria in terms of they being spent by the leadership to address what I revealed here as being things that I thought were important in terms of food, in terms of medicine, in terms of roads, infrastructure, and the like, may not have been the way in which they wanted to spend those dollars. So the issue that you have, even when you start to try to have fair trade, is then will it result in the more primary effect that Stiglitz brings up, and that is with a more equal distribution of wealth and health around the world. And it's not clear that that can be assured through normal market mechanisms. It's not even clear that all countries believe that all people are created equal, and that's part of the issue. Did that get to your question?
Yeah, I guess as a follow-up, you know, is there another structure where some of the profit from those exports gets taxed and that gets redistributed somehow through a UN or something like that?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question. The issue here in terms of international economics and the like is that it then intersects with notions of sovereign law, sovereign states. And we know, we live in a world that has developed a social notion of countries, of nation states. And those nation states have all, according to the way in which we, the United States, acknowledge law, nation states have sovereign law. And they can, and treaties are the only vehicle through which you can negate sovereign law. And so part of the issue that occurred when George Bush invaded Iran, I always get Iraq, right? Is that he invaded a sovereign country. And you can't do that. It doesn't matter whether the person is killing someone, given our legal system. Given our legal system. That's the way we've set it up. Now, to get where you would like to go, to say, look, if I give you an extra 20% profit for a 3-year period of time on the goods that I'm procuring from your country, I want to direct those profits towards education. I want to direct those profits towards malnutrition or the like, it's virtually impossible to do that because you can't take over the country. You cannot take over the country. Now, there are corporations clearly who have attempted to do that. Dole Pineapple is a Harvard Business School case study of what happened in Central America. Clearly, the oil companies in the Middle East have attempted to do that, but ultimately they are then confronted with nationalization. And that's an issue.
Hi, I just wanted to I'm Franco, I'm an economics major, an undergraduate economics major at Bluestone. I just wanted also to comment on what you were just talking about and about WTO and international institutions, especially the IMF. You spoke a while ago about conditionalities and how the IMF, for instance, would loan money to a country with certain conditions attached. More often than not, the conditions that are attached to this kind of loan would be, for instance, liberalizing the financial markets or opening up trade. And more often than not, these countries aren't built to compete in the global market. They're basically exposed to this this really turbulent global market where competitors like the United States, for instance, although don't have the comparative advantage, have absolute advantage. So these countries can't compete and they lose out even though they're trying to get money. So this kind of occurrence tends to be backwards moving instead of forwards moving. In the attempt to loan money, they actually destroy or undermine the economy stability of that.
What is your question?
I just wanted to comment on
Yeah, that's what happens. I mean, when I would do business in Indonesia or Malaysia, it was clear that over the years, I mean, believe it or not, it's hard to be a millionaire, okay? And so what happens is that when you come into a country and the Cabot Corporation makes carbon black. Carbon black is soot. If you put your hand over a candle, it's the closest thing to the black stuff that comes on your hand, that's carbon black. It's the closest thing to manufacturing dirt imaginable. It is carbon, okay? But carbon is necessary for everything, most notably tires and plastics and inks and any other coloration. Everything that's dark colored in this room has carbon black as a material in it. But so, therefore, carbon black plants are often put near tire plants. And tire plants are often put near what? Tire plantations or rubber plantations. Okay, and so I would go to our plant in Kuala Lumpur, which is in the middle of a rubber plantation. And it was clear that to deal with our guilt, okay, about exploiting a country, we would pay a lot of money for the right to have a plant. I would really pay up for the property, the value of the property, build the roads, the infrastructure, using local labor and the like. Make sure that the port was deep water enough and was capable, pay for that. Now, local folks were making a lot of money off of what the American corporation, was paying to be able to have access to, in fact, in this case, an over-the-fence relationship with Michelin Tire, who had developed the rubber plants in Kuala Lumpur. The incursion of that wealth and the rapidity with which people acquired that wealth did not give the country or the people the time to absorb it in any way that it could be put to work to deal with the overall economic development of the country. Now, when you say that to the person who's receiving all those dollars, they say, well, in whatever language you're dealing with, let me worry about that. Just give me the $1 million and that's the way I want it to happen. Right? That's what happens. That's what happens. Okay? But you know that there will be what the economists would call adverse effects due or externalities associated with this that are not controllable through the normal market mechanism in any short period of time.
One more question on this side, and then go to the other.
Hi, my name is Leah Turner. I was just wondering, is there any way that the richer, more powerful countries can offer some sort of incentives when